I'm Tim Oates. I'm Director of Research at Cambridge Assessment, and today I'm going to talk about learning loss and learning recovery. Learning loss, the kind of gaps and issues that have opened up in learning as a result of the very difficult circumstances that families, pupils and schools have been living through. Learning recovery, the kind of techniques and approaches that can be used in schools to really address those gaps and issues. Now, I know schools are having to put in place all sorts of practical measures to get children back to school, to observe the requirements around social distancing and management of pupil groups. I'm not going to deal with those today because those will play out in all sorts of different ways in different schools and different circumstances. I am going to deal with the most efficient and evidence-informed processes that we can use in learning recovery. Now, I know there's a tendency to worry about lost ground and leap back to normal, to what we were doing before. But actually, I think it's important to give pause for thought and think about what are the best techniques for really making sure that the limited time available for learning recovery is used most effectively. And OCR has put together materials and approaches which really support that process. Throughout everything I'm going to say today, I'm presupposing that technology is useful. It's been useful for keeping contact with pupils, allocating work, monitoring progress, and will remain useful in future. But I certainly start from the assumption, grounded in research, that it's no substitute for high-quality teaching and learning in the classroom. That's a really special thing, and it enables us to introduce pupils to challenging ideas that sometimes they naturally want to run away from, to really ensure their engagement, their understanding, monitor their progress, close gaps between pupils and ensure attainment. It's the impact on equity that we're particularly worried about. But we think that there's really solid research on approaches that enable us to improve both attainment and equity, and that's what I'll talk through today. What we know is that the learning gaps and the issues will be very, very individual. They'll be pretty much unique to each pupil, and we need to do something about that. We need to respond to that. Research tells us that pupils even those who participated in well-structured, intensive remote learning will still have tended to follow their preferences. Others in more disrupted households may either have elected not to participate in learning or may have been unable to participate. Misconceptions will have built up, confusions will have been put to one side rather than confronted and talked through. The natural reaction of teachers and managers will be to drive on with subject content to cover lost ground. But it's important to spend time on the diagnosis of individual gaps. Now I'm going to talk through some of the techniques for doing that. One-to-one sessions with pupils, honest and open discussions about what they really did during lockdown, those are going to be important. One-to-one sessions help not only understand learning gaps, but they help reintegrate pupils into school. The individual attention helps improve the emotional link between pupils and teachers, which is an essential part in regaining study habits and orientation to learning. We should have referral for welfare and safeguarding. Beyond possible decays in learning habits, mental health may have been adversely affected by lockdown. One-to-one sessions will help in allowing teachers who already know pupils to know when additional dedicated support is needed. Learning recovery will be far less possible and efficient if significant underlying health, welfare and safeguarding issues are not recognised and acted upon swiftly. Sessions on study skills will pay off. Ruth Deacon Crick's work shows that learning habits tend to become restricted and narrow when pupils are working by themselves. Pupils who don't like writing will avoid it. Those that don't like reading drop it, and so on. Evidence says that we should not go with learning preferences, not go with the grain, but actually give all pupils the ability to use a wide range of learning approaches. Using group work to talk through in different approaches which can be used is an important technique, as well as supporting individuals in widening their approaches. Deep reading and extended writing by pupils will be essential for effective learning recovery. They will need to do these things. If they can further develop these skills, it will really pay off for them in the school. Diagnostic assessment to support learning is going to be more and more significant as we go into recovery time. If not disruptive to welfare, introduce short focused tests in the first weeks of return. This will be extremely valuable in identifying learning gaps, while allocation of homework and catch-up tasks to individual will most likely play a big role in closing individual gaps and reducing inequalities. It's worth considering use of small group and full class discussion on gaps and how to close them. Past papers from exam boards, topic tests, really short, manageable things that can be used as part of learning can have a double function. They can identify gaps and prepare pupils for the kind of questions which will appear in GCSEs and A-levels in future. In the past, some researchers have argued that this narrows the curriculum and encourages surface learning, but this really need not be the case, and research tells us a rather different story, actually. Good questions, really used throughout teaching and learning, used throughout classroom discussion, stimulate thinking and reveal misconceptions both to pupils and to teachers. Geoffrey Carpick's work on retrieval practice, learning something and then swiftly being asked questions upon it, shows that responding to good questions consolidates learning more than simply going through material again. It actually consolidates the pathways in the brain to material and really helps with bringing together ideas and bringing to bear on demanding problems. Constant questioning is a feature of high-performing education systems and appears to stimulate pupils to think about subjects outside contact time and ask questions of one another outside contact time. Now, these are the kind of things that can make recovery effective and efficient and doesn't just place the burden on teachers. So rich discussion, critical. Probing questions, very important. And it seems to stimulate thinking and learning outside contact time, which we know is a key to high equity and high attainment. The pressure will be on to get through content, but increased productive discussion improves retention of learning. Providing rich questions and rapid feedback is really, really important, particularly in respect of misconceptions. Rich questions in the classroom, practice exam questions and learning materials which include high quality questions are important, but are a great deal more effective when there is rapid action to provide praise for achievement and support for misconceptions. The positive vibe from achievement will help reintegrate pupils back into school. Quick concept checks in class time plus instant review of responses is far superior to tasks which are not marked for several days and present a huge workload in terms of marking for teachers. These things need to provide feedback which pupils will pay attention to, and that's often not the case with things that they've done, handed over, take some time to mark, and then are handed back. Work which encourages thinking about the subject outside contact time is incredibly important, as I've emphasised, and tasks which are discussed in the next teaching session and lead to the next segment of the learning programme are proven in encouraging deep learning and good learning habits. In other words, ask some demanding questions at the end of sessions for pupils to go away and think about and bring the questions back to the next session, discussing them and feeding into the next segment of learning. These things are proven to pay off in terms of the effectiveness of learning. What's very reassuring is that if these techniques are used, then and the focus is on gaps and what pupils do not know, then achievement can really rapidly improve. John Hattie's work in New Zealand, after the devastating earthquake and gap in schooling there, shows that on return, if attention was paid to gaps and issues in learning, and not just proceeding with learning as it was proceeding prior to the gap, actually led to elevated attainment after the gap, not a depression. That's really reassuring. We can make up these learning gaps and address these issues if we use these kind of techniques. Use of commercial tests to systematically identify where pupils are is valuable. And of course they are already used extensively by schools. The data they give is dependable because of the scale of previous use of the items and the tests, and if that information is used not just to get a general sense of where things are, but to give targeted support back to children and back to groups, then that improves the effectiveness of recovery. Test services such as the Chem tests provided by OCR are helpful to probe attainment in areas like vocabulary, numerical reasoning and non-verbal reasoning. They can illuminate where support, guidance and additional learning is necessary to close individuals' gaps and thus reduce inequalities. The benefit of these tests is that a pupil's and school's results can be linked to comparable groups and national data, so helping with overall pupil management and school management. There's not been much discussion of production and quiet reflection. And by production, I mean pupils writing a lot, or producing a lot, talking a lot with each other in class, with the teacher, and so on. In the pressure to make up learning loss, it may seem that quiet reflection on things just taught is not possible because of the pressures on time. But it's known to consolidate learning and to encourage active thinking rather than passive learning. And when followed with immediate calls to explain, justify and elaborate ideas, it's extremely effective. It's in these discussions that misconceptions frequently are revealed and thus capable of being corrected, and pupils' misconceptions therefore not being taken in to the next phase of learning. You see, it's taking these misconceptions on without them being identified and addressed that can mean that pupils are struggling, that gaps between different learners open up, and group management becomes more challenging for teachers. These kind of techniques are really helpful to teachers in terms of classroom management. Increased production by pupils is really important. More writing, more talking, more drawing and so on. It reveals thinking. It reveals misconceptions. It stimulates thinking. It indicates progress and depth of understanding. And the more writing, drawing, talking pupils do, the more they will reflect on their own and others' thinking, and the more evidence teachers will have for learning management. For pupils affected by lockdown, production is essential. The challenge from lockdown and COVID-19 is huge. Both equity and attainment has been threatened by the learning loss which has occurred. Its highly variable impact is a huge challenge, but the approaches outlined in this introduction are drawn from research on teachers and system which have managed to improve attainment and equity, and without a huge increase in teacher workload. I wish everyone luck with this challenge of getting learning recovery in place using efficient and effective approaches supported by organisations like Cambridge Assessment.